Please, I'm facing eviction. I desperately need the money, and I promise I'll pay it back, little by little, every month.
Sit down and put that phone away. Those were the very first words I spoke, slicing right through the low murmur of my courtroom. I wasn't speaking to a hardened street criminal or a professional con artist. I was directing those words at a 24-year-old young woman standing before my bench, her arms crossed in an attitude of absolute boredom. Throughout my many years presiding from this chair, I have witnessed countless dark corners of human nature: greed, deceit, vengeance. But there is one specific thing that has always made me shudder with a profound, visceral outrage. It is when the younger generation looks at our elders and sees no sacrifice, no lifetime of wisdom, but simply an easy target. My name is Judge Judith Sheindlin. This is my courtroom. And on that particular Tuesday morning, the young woman who casually strolled through those doors had absolutely no idea that her arrogant worldview was about to be entirely dismantled. Across the room sat Margaret. She was 78 years old. As she entered, her steps were painfully slow, relying heavily on a worn wooden cane to bear her weight. If you looked closely, you could see the dark age spots stamped across the backs of her hands, the deep, permanent creases framing her eyes and forehead. But do not just see that as the mere physical signs of aging. No, that is the physical map of a life that has weathered 1,000 storms. Margaret had worked for 40 exhausting years as a night shift nurse, cleaning, caring for the sick, and scraping together every single penny to provide for her family. Those frail, trembling hands resting on the plaintiff's table today were the exact same hands that once cradled and spoon-fed the very granddaughter standing opposite her. Yet, instead of receiving the respect and unconditional love she had earned, Margaret was forced to stand here in the cold, unyielding environment of a courtroom. Her eyes did not burn with a fiery, vindictive anger. Instead, she stared down at the table, carrying a profound, quiet agony, the devastating pain of betrayal by the very blood she had sacrificed everything to raise. And then, look at the defendant, Chloe, her own flesh and blood, 24 years old. Her hair was styled in perfect, bouncy curls. Her fingernails boasted a flawless French manicure, and slung over her shoulder was a designer handbag that likely cost more than her grandmother's entire monthly pension. When she walked in, Chloe did not even bother to cast a single glance in Margaret's direction. She simply stood there, shrugging her shoulders, occasionally letting out a heavy, dramatic sigh, as if being summoned to court was nothing more than a terrible inconvenience to her busy personal schedule. She wore a subtle, mocking smirk, carrying an arrogant conviction that her grandmother was simply too old, too fragile, and too senile to understand her financial manipulation. Chloe honestly believed that aging was synonymous with intellectual blindness. She genuinely thought that the life savings her grandmother had built through decades of blood, sweat, and tears were just a default gift meant to fund her own youthful entitlement. But she was dead wrong. If you firmly believe that the sacrifices of the generations before us deserve to be fiercely protected, if you believe that no entitled child should ever be allowed to trample on the boundless generosity of an elder just because they think old people are easy to fool, then do not look away. Stay right here. Because what unfolds in this room over the next few hours is going to make every single arrogant person in this court hold their breath. Case number 3042, Margaret Vance versus Chloe Sterling. A claim for $5,000, the maximum limit of this court for a supposed unpaid loan that the defendant claims was a gift for her career development. I looked down from my bench, my eyes scanning the documents provided. Margaret's folder was organized with the precision of someone who had spent her life documenting vitals and patient charts. Every receipt, every bank statement was neatly clipped. Across from her, Chloe's side of the table was empty, save for her designer sunglasses and a smartphone that she kept glancing at, as if waiting for a more important invitation than a court summons. "Margaret," I said, my voice softening just enough to acknowledge her presence but remaining firm, "tell me about this $5,000. That is a significant amount of money for someone living on a fixed pension. Where did it come from?" Margaret took a shaky breath. She didn't look at the cameras. She didn't look at the gallery. She looked only at me, her eyes clouded with a mixture of shame and exhaustion. "It was my rainy day fund, Your Honor," she whispered. "I saved it over 10 years. I didn't want to be a burden to my children if I ever needed a nursing home. I kept it in a separate savings account, untouched. Until Chloe came to me crying." I turned my gaze to Chloe. "I want you to look at her face for a moment. Notice the way her jaw is set, that slight, rhythmic tapping of her manicured fingernails on the wood. In my decades on this bench, I have learned to read the physiognomy of entitlement. It's in the way she refuses to meet her grandmother's eyes. It's the way she tilts her head, projecting an image of victimhood while carrying a purse that costs more than a used car. She told me she was going to be evicted, Margaret continued, her voice trembling. She said she had a chance at a high-level marketing position, but needed to look the part and pay off back rent to keep her apartment. She promised, she swore on her life, that she would pay me back $100 a month, starting the moment she got her first paycheck. And did she get the job, Margaret? I asked. I don't know, Your Honor. After I handed her the cashier's check, she stopped answering my calls. She blocked my number. The only way I found out she was still in the city was through a Facebook post my neighbor showed me. A photo of her at a luxury resort in Miami, 2 weeks after she took my money. I turned to Chloe. Is that true, Chloe? Did you take $5,000 from this woman, a woman who spent 40 years on her feet in a hospital to save that money and then block her phone so you could go to Miami? Chloe didn't flinch. She didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. Instead, she let out a short, sharp laugh that echoed off the high ceilings of the courtroom. Your Honor, first of all, it wasn't a loan. My grandmother is confused. She's 78. She told me she wanted me to have the money as a living inheritance. She said she didn't want the government to take it when she passed away. The Miami trip was a networking event. I'm an influencer. I have to invest in my brand. Confused? I leaned forward, my shadow falling over her table. You think because she has gray hair and moves with a cane that her brain has turned to mush? You think old means easy target for your brand? I'm just saying, there's no contract, Chloe shrugged, her voice dripping with a casual malice that made the bailiff shift uncomfortably. She gave it to me. You can't sue someone for a gift just because you have giver's remorse now that you're lonely. The room went cold. I watched Margaret's face fall, her spirit breaking right there in front of me. She wasn't just losing her money, she was losing the last shred of hope that her granddaughter was a person of character. But Chloe was still smiling that small, toxic smirk. She thought she had won. She thought that without a formal, notarized contract, the law would protect her greed. She had no idea that in this courtroom the law isn't just about ink on paper, it's about the truth that lives in the gaps between the lies. And I was just getting started. Chloe, you stand there and tell me this was a living inheritance. You tell me that your grandmother, a woman who has spent her life counting every penny to ensure she wasn't a burden, suddenly decided to hand over her entire security net for your brand? I leaned back, my eyes narrowing. I wasn't looking at the law books anymore. I was looking at the girl. I want you to pay attention to Chloe's eyes in this moment. Notice how they dart to the exit, then to her phone, then to the ceiling, anywhere but at the woman she exploited. This is the physiognomy of a person who believes they are the smartest person in the room, yet they are drowning in their own shallow waters. I have something I want you to look at, I said, signaling my bailiff. I reached for the folder Margaret had handed over earlier. It wasn't just bank statements. It was a stack of color-printed screenshots from a social media platform. Margaret, where did these come from? I asked. My neighbor's daughter, Your Honor, Margaret said softly, her voice caught in her throat. She knew I was worried. She followed Chloe online. She saw these posts while I was at home, wondering if Chloe was even alive or if she had been evicted as she claimed. I picked up the first photo. It showed Chloe sitting on a white leather sunbed, a vibrant blue ocean in the background, holding a cocktail that probably cost more than Margaret's weekly grocery bill. The caption at the bottom read, "Manifesting my luxury era. When the universe provides, you don't ask questions. Blessed number wealth mindset." Chloe, I barked, is this the networking event you mentioned? Is this the brand investment that required $5,000 of your grandmother's emergency surgery fund? Because to me, it looks like a girl who stole from her family to play pretend in Miami. Chloe's fake smile finally faltered, replaced by a sharp, defensive sneer. Your Honor, you don't understand how the modern world works. To make money, you have to look like money. I was meeting with potential sponsors. That resort is where the big players stay. If I stayed at a motel, I'd look like a loser. My grandmother said she wanted me to be successful. She wanted you to be successful, not a thief. I slammed my hand on the bench. The sound echoed like a gunshot, making the people in the gallery jump. Chloe flinched for the first time. Success is built on character, not on a stolen luxury era. You lied to her. You told her you were being evicted. I have the text messages right here. I pulled out the second piece of evidence, a printed transcript of their last conversation. I read it aloud so everyone in that room could hear the cold-blooded manipulation. Chloe, Nana, please. If I don't get the $5,000 by tomorrow, the locks are being changed. I'll be on the street with nowhere to go. You're the only one I can trust. I'm so scared, Margaret. Oh, my sweet girl, don't be scared. I have my savings. I'll go to the bank now. Just promise me you'll stay safe. The room went absolutely silent. In the gallery, a man shook his head in disgust. A woman wiped a tear from her eye. They weren't just reacting to the lie. They were reacting to the murder of a grandmother's trust. I looked at Margaret. Her head was bowed, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She wasn't crying because she lost the money. She was crying because she realized that the sweet girl she was trying to save never existed. Chloe, on the other hand, was already looking for a loophole. I was scared. The threat of eviction is a mindset. I felt evicted from my potential. A mindset? I felt a heat rising in my chest, the kind of heat that comes when I see a soul that is truly hollow. You used her fear for your safety as a weapon to rob her. You looked at her age, her kindness, and her love for you, and you saw nothing but an ATM that didn't require a PIN. You thought old meant easy target. You thought she would never have the strength to stand up to you in front of the world. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a dangerous low rumble. But here's the thing about people who work for 40 years to save their money, Chloe. They are much tougher than you will ever be, and your brand is about to face its first real crisis, accountability. I want to talk about your career, Chloe, I said, leaning forward until the white lace of my collar was nearly touching the edge of the bench. I watched her carefully. Notice the way she shifted her weight from one foot to the other. Notice how she began to meticulously adjust the strap of that expensive handbag, her fingers trembling just enough to betray the calm facade she was trying so hard to maintain. This is what I call the physiognomy of deceit. When the mouth lies, the body usually tells the truth. Her eyes were darting toward the gallery, looking for an audience, looking for someone to buy into her performance. You told this court you are an influencer, I continued, my voice dripping with a skepticism that could peel paint. You said that $5,000 was an investment in your brand. Well, I've been around a long time, and I've seen a lot of brands. Usually, they are built on hard work, a product, or a service. But your brand seems to be built entirely on the back of a 78-year-old woman's night shift nursing pension. That's not a business model, Chloe. That's a parasite. Chloe's face flushed a deep, angry red, not the red of shame, but the red of a spoiled child who has finally been told no. Your Honor, you're being incredibly judgmental. My grandmother gave me that money because she believes in me. She knows that in today's economy, visibility is currency. I was going to pay her back once I landed the Miami contract. It's not my fault the deal fell through. The deal fell through? I barked. Show me the contract. Show me an email, a text, a carrier pigeon. Anything that proves a Miami contract ever existed outside of your own imagination. Chloe froze. She began fumbling through her phone, her thumbs tapping frantically. It was mostly verbal. High-level networking happens in person, Your Honor. That's why I had to be at the resort. Baloney. I slammed my hand down. You didn't go to Miami to work. You went to Miami to take pictures of yourself pretending to be someone you aren't, using money that didn't belong to you. And while you were sipping cocktails by the pool, Margaret was sitting in her kitchen with the heat turned down to 60 degrees because she was terrified she wouldn't have enough money for her property taxes. I turned my attention to Margaret. I want you to see the contrast here. Margaret wasn't moving. She didn't have to adjust a bag or check a phone. She sat with her spine straight, her hands clasped together, the hands of a woman who has spent 40 years doing the heavy lifting of society. She looked like a mountain that had been weathered by the wind, but remained unmovable. That is the physiognomy of integrity. Margaret, I said softly, when she asked for the money for the eviction, did she show you a notice from her landlord? No, Your Honor, Margaret whispered, her voice cracking. She just cried. She said they were going to put her things on the sidewalk the next morning. I didn't ask for papers. You don't ask your own granddaughter for papers when she tells you she's going to be homeless. I just went to the bank. Exactly, I said, turning back to Chloe, whose face was now twisting into a sneer of pure defiance. You didn't just steal her money, Chloe. You weaponized her love. You knew that the fastest way to get her to open her checkbook was to make her heart ache for your safety. You preyed on the very instinct that makes her a grandmother. She's 78, Chloe shouted, losing her cool. What was she going to do with that money anyway? It was just sitting there. I'm young. I have my whole life ahead of me. It's my time now, the gallery gasped. The bailiff stepped an inch closer. I sat back, a cold, sharp smile spreading across my face. Chloe had finally said the quiet part out loud. She had revealed the core of her strategy, the belief that the elderly are just placeholders for wealth that belongs to the young. Your time? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. You think it's your time? Well, Chloe, you're right about one thing. It is your time. It's time for you to learn that in this courtroom, the only thing that is sitting there is your debt to society, and I'm about to collect. I want everyone in this room to take a long, hard look at the defendant's face right now, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence like a surgical blade. I waited, letting the tension build until the only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning and the rhythmic tapping of Chloe's foot. Notice the way her eyes are shifting. That is the physiognomy of the predator. It's a specific look that people get when they realize their charm has run out and their lies are hitting a brick wall. It's a mixture of frantic calculation and a simmering resentment that they've finally been caught. You see, Chloe, I continued, leaning forward so that I was looking directly into her eyes, you made a fundamental mistake. You mistook kindness for weakness. You looked at Margaret's soft heart, and you saw a vulnerability to be exploited. But let me tell you something about the law that they don't teach you on social media. The law doesn't just care about what is written on a piece of paper. The law cares about intent. And your intent was as clear as the water in that Miami pool you were lounging next to. Chloe opened her mouth to interrupt, her face contorting into a mask of indignation. But, Your Honor, there's no contract. You can't just decide it's a loan because you feel sorry for her. Keep your mouth shut until I'm finished. I snapped, and for the first time, the smirk completely vanished from her face. In this courtroom, we have something called unjust enrichment and fraud in the inducement. You induced this woman to hand over her life savings by creating a false narrative of a crisis. You told her you were being evicted. That was a lie. You told her you would be on the street. That was a lie. You used her fear, the very real, visceral fear that an elderly woman has for her grandchild's safety, to extract money under false pretenses. In the eyes of the law, that is not a gift. That is a transaction based on a fraudulent claim. And that, Chloe, makes it a debt. I turned back to the gallery, addressing the audience directly. I want you to understand why this matters so much. To those of you watching at home, especially those of you who have worked your whole lives to build a small nest egg, do not let your love be used as a weapon against you. People like Chloe count on your silence. They count on your shame. They think you are too embarrassed to admit that your own blood would treat you like a victim. But Margaret wasn't embarrassed. She was brave. She stood up and said, "Enough." "Chloe," I said, returning my gaze to the girl. "You think you're a brand. You think you're an influencer. But let's look at what you're actually influencing. You're influencing a 78-year-old woman to lose sleep. You're influencing her to doubt her own judgment. You're influencing her to wonder if the 40 years she spent nursing strangers back to health was worth it if it resulted in a granddaughter who treats her like a discarded ATM. I picked up the bank statement and shook it at her. This $5,000 didn't fall from the sky. It represents thousands of hours of Margaret standing on her feet, tending to the dying, cleaning up messes you couldn't even imagine. And you blew it in a weekend because you wanted to look successful for people on the internet who don't even know your last name. The entitlement in the room was palpable. Chloe wasn't crying because she felt bad for Margaret. She was starting to tear up because she realized the money was going to be taken back. That is the physiognomy of the thwarted narcissist. The tears aren't for the victim, they are for the loss of the prize. "I'm not finished with you," I whispered, the weight of my authority filling every corner of the room. "We haven't even gotten to the part where you explain exactly how you plan to pay this back while maintaining your luxury-era lifestyle. Because I can promise you one thing. Before you spend another dime on a designer handbag, you are going to pay back every single cent of the blood, sweat, and tears you stole from this woman. Let's talk about your followers, Chloe," I said, my voice cold and precise. "I want you to observe the defendant's posture now. See how her shoulders have tightened? See the way she's chewing on the inside of her cheek? This is the physiognomy of the cornered ego. When a narcissist can no longer charm their way out of a situation, they don't feel guilt, they feel rage that their performance is failing. You told me that Miami was about networking and building a future," I continued, picking up a final set of papers. "But I have something here that you didn't think your grandmother would ever see. It seems Margaret isn't as disconnected as you assumed. She may not use Instagram, but she knows how to talk to people. And she talked to your former roommate." Chloe's eyes widened. The French manicured hand that was resting on the table began to tremble. I pulled out a printed copy of a private message Chloe had sent to her roommate just 24 hours after she received the $5,000 from Margaret. I read it slowly, letting every word hang in the air like a heavy fog. The old lady fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. I did the homeless and crying routine, and she practically handed me the checkbook. "Miami, here I come. I'll be famous before she even remembers she gave it to me. She's so out of it, she probably thinks it's 1,950 anyway." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the court reporter paused. In the gallery, a veteran in the front row stood up slightly, his face red with a righteous anger that mirrored my own. This wasn't just a financial dispute anymore. This was a document of pure, unadulterated cruelty. "Is this your brand, Chloe?" I leaned so far over the bench that I could see the sweat beads forming on her forehead. "Is your brand built on mocking the woman who changed your diapers? On laughing at the aging process of the person who gave you a home when no one else would?" You looked at her wrinkles and saw a green light to steal. You looked at her occasional forgetfulness, the kind that comes from a life spent caring for others, and you saw an opportunity to commit a crime. Chloe didn't have a comeback. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The influencer was silent. Her luxury era was evaporating in the harsh fluorescent lights of Courtroom 3042. "Your Honor, that was a joke. It was dark humor," she finally stammered, her voice high-pitched and desperate. "My roommate hated me. She's just trying to make me look bad. You can't use private messages against me. I can use the truth against you, Chloe. And the truth is that you are a predator who disguised herself as a granddaughter," I thundered. I turned to Margaret. For the first time, Margaret wasn't looking down. She was looking directly at Chloe. There were no more tears. Instead, there was a newfound clarity. It was the look of a woman who had finally realized that the person standing across from her wasn't the child she loved, but a stranger wearing her granddaughter's face. "Margaret," I said, my voice returning to a low, steady hum. "Did you know she felt this way about you?" "I suspected it, Your Honor," Margaret said, her voice stronger than it had been all day. "But I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to believe I had raised someone better. But seeing that message, it's like she killed the last memory I had of her as a little girl." I looked back at Chloe. Her mask had slipped completely. The easy target she had chosen wasn't just fighting back, she was winning. And Chloe? She was about to find out that fame in my courtroom comes with a very different kind of price tag. "Now, let's get down to brass tacks," I said, my voice dropping the thunder and adopting a cold, clinical edge. "I want you to watch Chloe's hands right now. Earlier, they were busy adjusting her hair and checking her phone. Now, they are white-knuckled, gripping the edge of the podium. This is the physiognomy of impending doom. It's the moment a con artist realizes that the walls aren't just closing in, they are about to collapse. "You have no money, do you, Chloe?" I asked, looking her straight in the eye. "That $5,000 is gone. It's in the pockets of resort owners, bartenders, and fashion boutiques in Miami. You don't have a brand, you don't have a contract, and you certainly don't have a job." Chloe tried to muster one last bit of defiance. "I told you, I'm building. It takes time to monetize. I'll pay her back once my following hits 50,000. I'm almost there." "Baloney!" I shouted, the word echoing like a gavel strike. "You'll pay her back when? In 10 years? When Margaret is 88? When she's already struggled through a decade of poverty because you wanted to play dress-up on the internet? You don't get to borrow someone's life savings and then dictate the terms of the return based on your following. This isn't a game of likes and shares. This is the real world where bills need to be paid and elderly women need their security." I turned to my computer screen, pulling up the financial disclosure Chloe was forced to submit before the trial. "I want you to see the smirk on my face. It's not a smile of joy, but a smile of pure, judicial satisfaction. I see here you still have that designer bag, Chloe, the one you're clutching like a life raft. And I see you have a car, a late-model sedan with a hefty monthly payment. Tell me, how are you paying for that car if you're facing eviction?" My parents helped me," she whispered, her voice finally cracking. "Your parents?" I leaned forward. "So you have parents who support you, yet you chose to rob your grandmother? You chose the easy target because you knew your parents would see through your lies. But Margaret would only see her granddaughter in trouble. That is a level of calculated malice that makes my skin crawl." I turned my attention to the audience, to all of you watching who have a Chloe in your life. Listen to me carefully. Guilt is not a legal defense. These predators use your history, your memories of them as children, to blind you to the person they have become. They look at your gray hair and they don't see wisdom. They see a living inheritance they are too impatient to wait for. Here is what is going to happen, Chloe, I said, my voice becoming a low, rhythmic drumbeat of authority. I am not giving you a payment plan. I am not giving you time to build your brand. You are going to go home. You are going to sell that bag. You are going to sell anything that isn't nailed down. And you are going to find a job, a real job, with a clock and a manager, and you are going to pay this woman back. But before we get to the final judgment, there is one more thing. I looked at Margaret. She looked weary, but there was a spark of dignity in her eyes that hadn't been there at the start of the day. She had seen the monster behind the mask, and she was still standing. Chloe, I said, look at your grandmother. Look at her one last time, because after today, if I were her, I wouldn't let you within 100 miles of my home. You didn't just steal her money, you stole her piece of part. And that is a debt you can never truly repay. Chloe didn't look. She looked at the floor, a single solitary tear of self-pity rolling down her cheek. She still didn't get it. She was only crying for herself. Stand up straight, I commanded. The verdict is coming, and trust me, you aren't going to like the engagement this post gets. I've seen enough, I said, my voice dropping to a tone of finality that made the air in the room feel heavy. I want you to look at the two women one last time. Notice the contrast in their stillness. Margaret is still like a stone cathedral, weathered but holy. Chloe is still like a broken toy, discarded and useless. This is the physiognomy of judgment. It is the moment where the truth no longer needs to be shouted because it has already filled every corner of the room. Chloe, I began, my eyes boring into hers, you came into this courtroom thinking you were playing a game. You thought that because you are young and digital, you could outsmart a woman who lived through eras you only read about in history books. You thought her age was a weakness. You thought her love was a loophole. But the only person who was confused today was you. I picked up my pen, the ink ready to seal her fate. You claimed this was a gift. The law says otherwise. When you secure funds through a fabricated crisis, when you lie about being homeless to extract the life savings of a senior citizen, that is not a gift. That is a predatory act. And in my courtroom, predators do not get to keep their prey. I looked directly at the camera, addressing everyone watching at home. Let this be a warning to every influencer who thinks their ego is worth more than their character. You can hide behind filters and hashtags all you want, but you cannot hide from the truth of who you are. And to the Margarets of the world, do not be ashamed of your kindness. It is the Chloes of the world who should be ashamed for trying to extinguish it. I turned back to the bench and struck the gavel with a force that echoed like a thunderclap. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $5,000 plus court costs, and I am issuing an immediate garnishment order on any assets you have, including that car and that bag. If you want to live a luxury era, Chloe, you can do it on your own dime, not your grandmother's. Chloe's face finally crumbled, not into a fake, curated sadness for her followers, but into a raw, ugly realization that her world of pretend was over. She looked at Margaret, perhaps hoping for one last shred of grandmotherly mercy. But Margaret didn't look back. She simply stood up, adjusted her worn wooden cane, and turned toward the exit. She didn't need the money to be whole. She needed the justice to be served. As she walked past Chloe without a single word, she looked 10 feet tall. We are adjourned, I said, my voice echoing in the silent hall. Chloe stood there alone at her table, her designer bag suddenly looking very heavy and very empty. She had come here thinking old meant easy target. She left with a lesson she will never, ever forget. In Judge Judy's court, the only thing that gets influenced is the truth. And justice? Justice never goes out of style.